And that silence inside the palace wasn't the kind you hear with your ears, it's the kind you feel when something has already changed, permanently. Not officially announced, not confirmed in any dramatic statement, but in the way Queen Letizia reportedly paused, just for a second longer than usual, when Princess Leonor's name came up in a recent conversation, something shifted. And I keep asking myself, what does a mother actually feel in a moment like that? Because this isn't just about royalty. This isn't just about duty or succession or protocol. This is about a realization, quiet, heavy, almost invisible from the outside. That the child you raised is no longer someone you can pull back into your world. She's already stepping into another one. And once that happens, there's no coming back in the way people imagine. Let's be honest about something most media won't say directly. Royal stories are usually told like timelines. Birth, education, appearances, duties, future queen narrative. But real human emotion doesn't move in timelines. It moves in moments. And the moment people are quietly pointing to here, whether they realize it or not, is not about Princess Leonor leaving physically. It's about psychological departure. The kind where a parent suddenly understands. I can guide her, but I cannot retrieve her life anymore. And that realization, if it ever truly lands, it changes everything. Now I want to pause here and ask you something directly. Have you ever watched someone you love become unreachable, not because they left you, but because they evolved beyond the version of them you knew? That's the emotional core of this entire story. And I think that's what Queen Letizia is being framed around in this narrative, not as a monarch, but as a mother standing at the edge of irreversible transition. At around this point in the public imagination, Princess Leonor isn't just a teenager anymore. She's a symbol, a future queen in training. A figure compared, sometimes unfairly, to Princess Kate Middleton's early royal years, or even the global pressure trajectories we see with public figures like Elon Musk's children, or the way audiences analyze every move of modern influential families. Different worlds, same pressure pattern. Visibility strips privacy, expectation replaces adolescence, and suddenly, every step feels like a direction the world is already interpreting for you. But here's the hot take most people miss. The real tension in this story is not Leonor leaving home. It's that she was never really allowed to stay fully at home in the first place. From the moment she was born into succession, her life was already partially spoken for. So when people say, she's not coming back, what does that even mean? Coming back to what? A normal childhood that never fully existed? Or the illusion of one we project onto royal families? Now imagine Queen Letizia in that internal space. Not the public queen, not the media image, but the mother who remembers first steps, school mornings, private laughter behind palace doors. And now imagine her noticing something subtle. Maybe it's not one event. Maybe it's a series of micro-moments. Leonor speaking more confidently without looking for approval. Leonor standing slightly taller in public appearances. Leonor responding with the calm distance of someone who has already rehearsed independence. And Letizia realizes, this isn't preparation anymore. This is transformation. And here's where I need to add my own perspective, my human marker in this analysis. I don't think this is a story about loss. I think it's a story about emotional reclassification. Because at some point, every parent of a highly structured child has to stop seeing them as my child who will return to how things were. And start seeing them as my child who is becoming someone I will have to meet as an adult. That shift is brutal, not dramatic, just final. And that's where the title phrase becomes psychologically interesting. The moment Letizia realized Princess Leonor was not coming back. Not physically, not politically, but emotionally. Because something in the dynamic changes when a child stops orbiting the parent's emotional gravity and begins orbiting their own destiny. And I keep wondering, did that moment happen in a palace hallway? Or was it quieter than that? A glance, a pause, a sentence left unfinished. Those are usually the real turning points. Let's widen this lens for a second. In modern media culture, especially in 2026 storytelling ecosystems, we are obsessed with breakaway moments. When someone becomes independent, when someone escapes expectation, when someone steps into their own identity. We see it in celebrity culture, in royal narratives, even in creator culture with figures like Mr. Beast building empires where independence happens at scale, in public, under constant observation. But here's the contradiction nobody talks about. The more visible your life is, the less private your transitions become. So even emotional separations become public narratives. Even motherhood becomes a storyline. And that leads me to an uncomfortable question. Are we watching Letizia's realization, or are we projecting it onto her? Because often, the media doesn't wait for confirmation of emotion. It constructs emotion from posture, timing, silence, expression. A pause becomes tension. A glance becomes meaning. A silence becomes revelation. And suddenly, we have a full emotional script built from fragments. But let's not dismiss it entirely either. Because sometimes, humans really do register change before they admit it out loud. There is always a moment before acceptance. A pre-realization phase, where you already know something has shifted, but you haven't yet named it. That's the dangerous part, because once you name it, you can't unknow it. So if we treat this story as a symbolic narrative rather than a confirmed event, then what we are really talking about is this. A mother watching her daughter step fully into institutional destiny. A daughter becoming more than family identity. A future queen stepping out of personal space and into historical space. And a mother realizing those two spaces don't fully overlap anymore. And I want to slow this down for a second. Because this is where viewers usually miss the emotional depth. People think, she's becoming queen someday, is a long-term idea. But psychologically, it happens in increments. A speech here, a military appearance there, a moment of composure under pressure, each one quietly removing a layer of childhood identity. Until one day, there is nothing left to go back to. Not because something was taken, but because everything has been repurposed. If you're watching this and thinking this is just about royalty, I'd challenge that. Think about any structured life. Athletes, child prodigies, political heirs, even digital creators raised in public attention. There is always a moment where the system stops feeling like training and starts feeling like identity. That's the moment of no return. Not dramatic, just irreversible. And here's my final take, my human conclusion in this narrative. If Queen Letizia is truly standing in that realization, it wouldn't be tears or public expression that define it. It would be composure. Because in high-pressure systems like monarchy, emotion doesn't exit loudly. It exits quietly, and gets replaced by function. Duty takes over where personal attachment once lived. Not because love disappears, but because it has to adapt. So maybe the real question isn't whether Princess Leonor is not coming back. Maybe the real question is, what does coming back even mean when someone's life was designed to move forward from the beginning? And if Letizia did have that moment, it wouldn't be the end of something tragic. It would be the beginning of acceptance. The kind that doesn't get announced. The kind that just settles in. And I'll leave you with this thought. Sometimes the most powerful shift in a royal story isn't a coronation, or a speech, or a public appearance. It's a mother realizing she is no longer the center of her daughter's world, but just one part of it. And the world is already watching what comes next. And 5 minutes later, nothing dramatic changes on the surface. That's the part people usually misunderstand about moments like this. There is no loud break. No announced shift. No official statement that says, this is the point of no return. Instead, life continues exactly the same way it always has. But internally, something has already been reclassified. Let's stay inside that idea for a second. Because if Queen Letizia did have that realization, quiet, internal, almost unspoken, then the next stage is not emotion. It's adaptation. And adaptation in royal environments doesn't look like breakdown. It looks like control. Composure becomes the language of processing change. Now imagine the palace not as a building, but as a system. Every movement has meaning. Every appearance is scheduled. Every expression is observed. So even personal transitions, mother and daughter transitions, get absorbed into structure. And that's where emotional reality starts to feel delayed. Like it happens inside the person first, and only later becomes visible to the world, if ever. And I keep thinking about Leonor in this. Because from her perspective, nothing feels like not coming back. She's not thinking in finalities. She's thinking in steps. Next duty, next appearance, next responsibility. But that's exactly how irreversible change always feels at the beginning. Ordinary, manageable, even familiar. Until one day it isn't. Here's a question I want to put right in the middle of this story. When does a person stop being guided and start being defined? Because that line is different for everyone. But in royal life, that transition often happens earlier than most people realize. And once definition begins, guidance slowly fades into background noise. Now, I want to be careful here, because this is where viewers can misread the story. This is not about abandonment. This is not about distance in a negative sense. This is about structural destiny. And I think that's what makes it emotionally complex. Because love can remain fully intact, while access changes completely. Both can be true at the same time. And that's uncomfortable for most people to accept. Let's zoom back into Letizia for a moment. If she really did register this shift, it wouldn't be a single thought like a sentence. It would be more like layers. First layer, awareness. Second layer, recognition. Third layer, acceptance trying to resist recognition. And then finally, acceptance that stops resisting. That final stage is the one people describe later as a moment. But in reality, it's a process compressed into memory. And here's my personal take, my human marker in this reflection. I think what makes this story resonate, even if we're only seeing fragments of it, is because it mirrors a universal truth. At some point, every parent has to stop emotionally rehearsing old versions of their child. The child who needed them. The child who asked before acting. The child who looked back for reassurance. And start relating to the version that no longer looks back the same way. That shift is not loud. But it is permanent. Now let's talk about what the public often misses in royal narratives. We tend to frame everything as event-based. A visit, a speech, a ceremony. But emotional reality inside those systems is threshold-based. Small internal thresholds that don't look significant until you stack them together. And then suddenly, the person you thought was in one stage of life is already halfway into another. So when people say, this is the moment Letizia realized Leonor was not coming back, what they might actually be pointing to is not a single event, but the first undeniable accumulation of adulthood in her daughter. Not rebellion, not separation, just consistency in becoming. And I want to ask something that might sit with you after this video ends. Is it harder to witness someone you love leave you? Or to witness them become someone who never needed to leave in the first place? Because that second one is what happens when identity shifts internally before relationships can catch up. And now we widen the lens again. In modern public life, royalty, influencers, global figures, the emotional pace of change is often invisible. We see polished outputs. We see appearances, but we rarely see the internal recalibration happening in real time. That gap between what is shown and what is felt is where stories like this are born. And I'll say this clearly as my final reflection in this continuation. If there is a moment in this narrative, it is not about separation. It is about recognition without resistance. The moment a parent stops hoping to reverse time and starts understanding time has already moved forward. Not in tragedy, not in loss, but in inevitability. And maybe that's why this story keeps circulating. Because deep down, it's not just about a princess. It's about something every human understands but rarely says out loud. There are people we don't lose. We simply stop being able to return to an earlier version of them. And once that realization settles in, everything else becomes adjustment, quiet, controlled, permanent. And life continues, as it always does.